AEW has signed a lot of wrestlers in its history, and so because of that, a lot of wrestlers that are signed get lost in the shuffle very quickly and aren't getting booked as well as the fans would like. But some AEW signings just served absolutely no purpose to begin with, and I really couldn't give any solid reason as to why AEW would even sign them to begin with. In today's video, we're discussing wrestlers and managers who AEW signed that truly there was just no reason for AEW to even sign them, and AEW themselves realized that. So yeah, like the video and let's get into it. On July 15th, 2020, Vickie Gurrerro debuted in AEW as the new manager of Nyla Rose. Vickie was most known for her time in WWE, where she shouted "excuse me" 12 million times and was the manager of wrestlers like Edge and Dolph Ziggler. And of course, Viva la Raza Eddie Guerrero. She debuted for AEW, having made a guest appearance a few months prior, which WWE apparently totally cut her off for doing. Vickie Gurrerro would accompany Nyla to every match and act as her mouthpiece, and to be honest, I didn't like this pairing. I don't think Nyla needed a mouthpiece. I think she was pretty good on the mic herself. And the next client Vickie Gurrerro would manage in AEW would come into fruition in June 2021 when Vickie Gurrerro introduced her newest client, that being Andrade El Idolo, who made his debut for AEW being introduced by Vickie Gurrerro in the most awkward segment ever. And again, it's just something I don't think was ever needed. Vickie Gurrerro did not need to be the manager of Andrade El Idolo, and in fact just a month later AEW would pivot, and instead in July they would get Chavo Guerrero as Andrade's new manager, who would be the new person accompanying and talking for him. Chavo as well is a guy who was in the WWE forever and is known for Los Guerreros and being an ECW and Cruiserweight champion. However, he's long been retired, and once again he is a guy just like Vickie Gurrerro who was not needed to be the manager for Andrade El Idolo. I don't see why they got him for this. And this partnership also only lasted a little bit of time, only lasting a little longer than the one with Vickie, as Andrade turned on him in September and Chavo was never seen on AEW again. As for Vickie, she would become a fixture of AEW Dark instead, as she continued to accompany Nyla up until early 2023 when she departed AEW. Two completely pointless signings who, whilst they were signed, AEW realized, wait, why the fuck did we sign them? Paige VanZant was an interesting signing for AEW. She was the first MMA fighter to sign to the company and give a go at wrestling, but was she any good? And where is she now? If you don't know who Paige VanZant is, well, like I said, she was an MMA fighter who was best known for her time in the UFC. She had some star power to her in the UFC and was clearly liked by the higher-ups there. However, she was never skilled enough to be a contender for championships or anywhere near the top of her division, and after Paige left UFC in mid-2020, she finished her MMA career with a record of 8 wins and 5 losses, with her July 2020 loss to Amanda Ribas in round 1 on UFC 251 being her last MMA fight to date. And now in free agency, Paige VanZant of course looked to explore other options, and one of those was of course professional wrestling, as in September 2021 she began making appearances for AEW. And these appearances were of course as a part of American Top Team alongside Dan Lambert and other MMA fighters who were feuding with Chris Jericho and the Inner Circle. And as an AEW fan, I gotta say, I want to totally forget this feud ever happened. It was dreadful. But of all the MMA fighters on TV for the storyline, Paige VanZant absolutely stood out the most and seemed the most natural, and people could definitely see a future with her getting in the ring. She was yet to have a match on AEW, but on the February 2nd, 2022 Dynamite, Paige VanZant confronted Brandi Rhodes and teased that she could be debuting against her. However, this angle was dropped because the next month, Cody and Brandi left AEW unexpectedly. Dang. Despite this though, there were still plans for Paige seemingly, as on March 4th she was announced as All Elite and officially signed to AEW. Then 5 days later, on the March 9th episode of Dynamite, she attacked Ty Conti before costing her boyfriend Sammy Guevara his TNT title match with Scorpio Sky, and this would lead to Paige VanZant's one and only match in AEW in the most random pay-per-view match ever, as at AEW Double or Nothing 2022 it was herself, Scorpio Sky and Ethan Page against Ty Conti, Sammy Guevara and Frankie Kazarian. It was a fine 6-person tag match, it was whatever, and honestly though, it was a good debut match for Paige VanZant considering it was her debut. She looked good, and it was definitely something to build on. She did some impressive moves, took some good bumps, and it was a good first showing as her team got the victory. But as I said earlier, this was her only match. In fact, it's also the last time she's been seen in AEW, and after being inactive for a few years, it was understood that Paige VanZant had quietly departed from AEW when she was quietly removed from the AEW roster page in 2024. And following this, it doesn't look as though a return to wrestling is on the table for Paige VanZant, as since this, she has gone on to do Power Slap and also have a boxing match in which she faced influencer Elle Brooke, where she fought to a draw after being dropped in the first round. Why on earth did AEW sign Parker Boudreaux? I will truly never understand it. If you don't know who Parker Boudreaux is, he's actually a former WWE talent who didn't last very long there. We'll talk about that in a second. But he came into WWE with a bit of hype behind him, and that's because Parker Boudreaux was a college football standout. But due to concussion problems, he had to call his career early. However, when Paul Heyman became aware of him and likened him to Brock Lesnar due to the two having a striking resemblance, as well as calling him the next big thing, hype behind Parker started to build, and fans figured that Parker Boudreaux may end up in the WWE very soon. He had the Paul Heyman endorsement, he had the exact look and build that WWE love, and WWE had also just entered an era where they were signing more athletes to the company, just like Parker Boudreaux. And sure enough, Parker Boudreaux would sign for the WWE, with reports coming out from February 6, 2021 that he had signed a contract, with AEW also in the race to sign him. And later that month, that report was confirmed, and Parker Boudreaux would report to the WWE Performance Center, and after about 6 months of training in the PC, Parker would make his first appearance on NXT TV on the October 5th, 2021 episode, as he aligned himself with Joe Gacy as his muscle. And he was now under the brand new ring name of Harland, no relation to Erling whatsoever. He was actually originally called Gunnar Harland, which I think is actually a really sicko mode name, but it was reduced to just Harland after a couple of days. He would make his in-ring debut a couple months later in December, defeating Guru Raj, just squashing him, and he continued to squash wrestlers for the next 4 months alongside Joe Gacy. However, out of nowhere, he was released from the WWE on April 29th, 2022. A release that was out of nowhere due to the sheer amount of hype around him before he had signed for the WWE, and for the fact that he had just gotten started and had hardly even done anything in the company. And apparently the reason that WWE fired Parker Boudreaux was that WWE wanted him as a member of the Judgment Day. That was the original plan for him, but after Parker showed no improvement in the ring and apparently had developed a bit of a reputation of that he gets hurt a lot, these plans were scrapped and WWE ultimately just chose to let him go. Following his WWE release, Parker would return to wrestling to turn up in the MLW Battle Riot in June 2022, back using his real name of Parker Boudreaux, and then soon after, he would start making appearances on AEW Dark. He would become a regular on the show, and he would form the Trustbusters alongside Arya Daivari, Slim J, and Sonny Kiss, pretty much the most random stable in wrestling history. And he was squashing guys weekly on AEW Dark for months, pretty much just the same as he was doing in NXT. Surprisingly enough though, he gets signed to a full-time contract in August and make his first TV appearance that same month, and it was a puzzling signing given that he was in a jobber stable and nearly exclusive to the Dark brand. But that was going to change seemingly, as Parker Boudreaux would appear on the December 22nd Dynamite episode, where he was revealed as a member of the Mogul affiliate alongside Swerve Strickland, Trench if you remember that guy, and Rick Ross as well. However, this just didn't last long at all, and months later Parker Boudreaux would disappear from the group as the Mogul affiliates merged with the Embassy to form the Mogul Embassy, and he wasn't a part of it. And that was all the way back in April of 2023. His last match was in March of 2023 in a tag match with Swerve Strickland, so it's been over a year since he appeared for AEW, as he was injured with an unknown serious injury in July. But finally, after sticking around in AEW for a while just doing absolutely nothing, Parker Boudreaux was released from AEW in April 2024 as part of budget cuts in AEW. Perhaps the AEW signing that got the most backlash of them all though was the signing of Ric Flair to the company. Ric Flair doesn't need any introduction. He's the former 16-time champ, the long-time veteran and legend, and you'll most likely remember him from all his escapades in the WWE, you know, Evolution and all that. Ric Flair had his retirement match in WWE in 2008 and then his actual retirement match in TNA in 2013 before he had one more match in 2022, and somehow on the October 25th, 2023 Dynamite, he managed to worm his way into AEW. He debuted as a gift to Sting, or something apparently, and he would accompany him and appear with him on TV leading up to Sting's final match. But the reason why Ric Flair's signing caused so much backlash was due to past allegations made against him relating to the plane ride from Hell incident, which were publicized in the 2021 Dark Side of the Ring episode about the incident. But even just removing that and pretending that didn't even happen, this signing is still just so utterly pointless and dreadful business from AEW. Because yeah, sure, whatever, it's for Sting, but Sting just had his final match. He's retired and seemingly not going to be on AEW TV all that much in the future, if at all. So what is Ric Flair even there for now? Why would you sign Ric Flair on a multi-year deal when Sting is retiring in 4 months' time? Make it make sense. Do you really need the Woo Energy sponsorship that badly? Which, by the way, in case you weren't aware, Ric Flair has an energy drink called Woo Energy, which sponsors AEW, and you probably didn't know this because I'm convinced that not a single person on the planet has ever tried or even seen this energy drink anywhere before. Luckily for AEW fans though, it was reported that Ric Flair had departed AEW in July 2024 and would not be sticking around for years, and we don't have to hear about that damn energy drink anymore. On the December 22nd, 2022 episode of AEW Dynamite, the Mogul Affiliate stable would make their debut in AEW by attacking Keith Lee. Being led by Swerve Strickland, this new stable consisted of himself, Rick Ross, Parker Boudreaux, and another tattooed guy, who nobody was able to immediately identify, which meant this was a new AEW signing, as the others in the stable were all people that had appeared in AEW previously or were known to be signed. Swerve Strickland had been signed to AEW since the start of that year. Parker Boudreaux, though also a random signing, had been signed for some time and was part of another random stable before in the Trustbusters. Heck, even Rick Ross had appeared in AEW before the forming of the Mogul Affiliates. However, this tatted guy clearly was someone who was new and hadn't appeared in AEW before. And once again, nobody knew who this was at first. People suspected he was an indie wrestling talent, but still, nobody was able to dig up any old matches or anything to find out who this was, but it was eventually revealed that this guy was known as Trench. Real name Grandin Goatsman, he's a former baseball player who was 30 at the time of signing with AEW and had zero prior wrestling experience. Regardless though, you can definitely say that Trench had a great look and looks like he belonged in the Mogul Affiliates, but it was going to be interesting to see how he would do and how he was as a wrestler, considering he had no experience and was being thrown into a major company. He would continue to appear on TV along with the Mogul Affiliates as Swerve would continue feuding with Keith Lee in their never-ending feud, but as the months went on, Trench still hadn't wrestled a match or to my knowledge even spoke all that much, and the Mogul Affiliates would become more and more of an afterthought as the months went by. Then in March 2022, both Trench and Parker Boudreaux would go down with injuries, and in their absence the Mogul Affiliates would pretty much dissolve and come to an end when Swerve formed the Mogul Embassy with the Gates of Agony and Brian Cage as his new stablemates. And then in June of 2023 it was reported that AEW had no further plans for Trench and Parker, and sure enough, on July 3rd it was reported that Trench was no longer under contract with AEW, having had 0 matches and being a complete afterthought from the moment he debuted. I bet most of you watching don't even remember him. A completely pointless signing. On the October 23rd, 2013 episode of WWE NXT, the ravishing Russian Lana would make her WWE debut, scouting Alexander Rusev, the man she would eventually become the on-screen manager of, as CJ Perry, who played Lana, had no wrestling experience prior to signing, but quickly embraced the role she was in and was brilliant in her role, particularly with her excellent mic work. And her and Rusev were a great act together, and after a quick NXT run, they they were called up to the main roster in 2014 and would quickly rise up the roster as Rusev would become US champion in November. He'd have a great reign, which of course included the match against John Cena at WrestleMania, which of course he lost, but Lana was there as well through all of this, and it was a great spot for both of them. But after Rusev lost, the rest of Lana's WWE run was kinda weird. They teased a breakup between Lana and Rusev on TV, but after it came out they had got married in real life, those plans were quickly reversed, and she would continue to accompany Rusev and even started wrestling herself and had a few matches over the years, but the less said about them the better. Then in 2019 there was that weird storyline with her and Bobby Lashley, and then that weekly period of Nia Jax putting her through tables, and after Rusev was released from WWE in 2020, Lana would stick around for a bit, but eventually she herself was released from the WWE on June 2nd, 2021. She would go inactive in wrestling for a bit, but she would return to wrestling when she made her AEW debut on the All Out pay-per-view in 2023, coming to the aid of Miro, who seemed hesitant about CJ Perry now managing him. She was under the name of CJ now in AEW, and she would later say in a Collision interview that she would not be managing Miro in AEW and looking for other clients instead, and thus would start managing Andrade, who funnily enough found himself feuding with Miro. Andrade and Miro faced at World's End, where Miro won in what was Andrade's final match for AEW, and one where CJ turned on him to realign with Miro, as it looked like she was now going to be the full-time on-screen manager for him. But after this, CJ was never seen on AEW again, as Miro went out with injury, and it was also revealed that they had divorced, so would be kinda awkward putting them on TV together. And CJ revealed in July of this year that she was no longer with AEW, and her appearances were pretty much for nothing. Melanie Cruz made her AEW debut on the December 4th, 2019 episode of Dynamite, debuting as a Planted Audience member who volunteered to join Brandy Rhodes and Awesome Kong in their stable called the Nightmare Collective and let them shave her head. And if you don't remember the Nightmare Collective by any chance, it was a stable made up of course Mel, which was now her name, it was no longer Melanie Cruz, just simply known as Mel, Brandy Rhodes, Awesome Kong, and also Luther, and it's probably the biggest bust in early AEW in their first year here in 2019. And she would make her in-ring debut on the 15th of January 2020 Dynamite, teaming up with Brandy Rhodes in a loss against Chris Statlander and Hikaru Shida. It was originally meant to be Mel and Awesome Kong teaming together, but Kong got injured, so Brandy Rhodes had to replace her, and the match definitely suffered as a result of that, but Mel herself was also not an impressive worker and really didn't show much in this match. It was a pretty woeful match and not a good debut match whatsoever for Mel. She'd wrestle once more that month, losing to Shida on Dark, but after this the Nightmare Collective continued to get a negative reception and was completely rejected by the fans with go away heat. And so because of this, in late January 2020, AEW would also start airing segments of Brandy Rhodes seeing a therapist, and this was done to disband the Nightmare Collective group and return Brandy Rhodes back to a regular character. And so just like that, the Nightmare Collective was finished. They lasted only a couple of months, and it was scrapped due to it just being completely rejected by the fans. Mel really got her head shaved just for the group to end a month later. Now that is tough. And without the Nightmare Collective, Mel was left to tread water alone, and AEW had no idea what to do with her. Mel would only wrestle occasionally and never on TV, it was always on YouTube. She'd pick up her first win against Kylan King on Dark in May, as well as enter the Women's Deadly Draw Tag Team Tournament, where she was paired with Penelope Ford and lost to Ali and former ally Brandy Rhodes. This match of course was on YouTube. She'd get one last victory against Red Velvet on Dark, and after nearly a year of inactivity from AEW after this, she was removed from the roster page in August of 2021. From her AEW debut in December of 2019, she wrestled only 5 times for the company, and I cannot stress enough, shaved her head for the company just for her storyline to be scrapped a month later. Ouch.